Hello, Cindy here. So excited to be here with you guys today. And I'm excited to dive into our topic. We're talking about boundaries, which can be, something that's challenging for a lot of people in general, not just women, but men as well. So we're going to dive into different types of boundaries and also how to set them when it comes to dating and relationships with men. So, first off, wow, I gotta look for something. First off, sorry, I had a few notes. So, what are personal boundaries, right? So, boundaries are the limits or rules that we set for ourselves, basically our standards that we set for ourselves within relationships. It's that line in the sand. So there are three popular types of boundaries. And I'm going to talk about those, uncover those, and help you to relate that to relationships. Okay. So, oftentimes, healthy boundaries is one of the boundaries that is set. And oftentimes, people with healthy boundaries have a really easy time getting intimate in relationships and not getting triggered by another person or their energy when it comes to themselves, their boundaries, they trust. So here's what I'm going to dive into when it comes to that. So the first type of boundary is what we call rigid boundaries. So rigid boundaries are kind of like what it sounds like. They're rigid boundaries. The tendency is to have not many close interpersonal relationships. They tend to avoid intimacy in relationships. And I'm not talking about physical intimacy. I'm talking about real, raw, being yourself, opening up your heart, personal intimacy, things that you're afraid that somebody's going to hate you for type of intimacy. They're unlikely to ask for help. And this is a big one. People with rigid boundaries tend to be protective of their personal information. So they tend to be more paranoid, protective. There's a thought process like, people are out to get me, so to speak. And they may also seem detached from romantic partnerships. That's another one. Now, not that they are necessarily detached, they may come across that way. So if you've ever been asked the question, gosh, I'm not sure if you really like me, or I can't really get a read on whether you're that interested in me or not, that might be a sign that you have some rigid boundaries, rigid walls up. So that's one. Porous boundaries, that's the second one that I'm going to talk about. Porous boundaries is, you guessed it, it's the other end of the spectrum. So porous boundaries is somebody that overshares information, has a hard time saying no, and they have the tendency to be over involved and over caring about what other people's problems are. So they allow their emotions to spill over into somebody else's issues, problems. They really let it affect them a lot. They tend to be really value the opinions of others, so much so that they depend upon it. So if there's a friend of yours that says, don't talk to him anymore, he did this, or you should give him another shot, when I'm talking about men and relationships, right? And the the other side to that is porous boundaries is someone that has accepted or accepts abuse or disrespect when it comes to relationships. Now, and then I'm going to talk really quick about healthy relationships. Tina, you just said that's me. Yeah, it's that just, it, when I think of somebody with porous boundaries, I think of a people pleaser. So I think of somebody that they're looking to get validation from the outside world, more or less. So, and I'm going to touch on something too. With these boundaries, we can have different types of boundaries in different areas of our life. So in our personal life, we might be more one way. In our professional life, we might be more, rigid, or, in our, in with our family, we could be a combination of three. The thing is about boundaries, it's also understanding which one do you mostly relate to and where do you want to go from here. And through this, I'm going to talk about healthy boundaries in a second. Through this, I'm going to support you around setting boundaries right away when it comes to dating, relationships, and, learning to be open about your wants, needs, and desires. Now, sometimes, you might be thinking to yourself, I can't always identify with my wants, needs, and desires. And I can relate to that because, I grew up not really having a voice, so to speak. I was to be seen and not heard. I was, if I had an opinion, I oftentimes was told that, what do I know? I'm just a child, right? And so the effect that had on me was I didn't always know how to identify my wants, needs, and desires because my boundaries had become porous. I was really trying to get the approval of my family members, my parents. So, and my parents had did really great things as well. So I'm not trying to say anything negative, but there's certain things that happen in our lives that can cause us to be more one way than another. So healthy boundaries, when I think of healthy boundaries, it's all about flexibility. So remember flexibility because this is going to carry over for you when it comes to relationships. So somebody with healthy boundaries, you have your own opinions and you actually value them. The next one is you don't compromise your values for other people. So something just doesn't feel right. You've identified what your values are and you're not compromising them for someone else. And you also know your personal wants, needs, and desires, and you know how to articulate them with, unapologetically. And you also get that no means no. If somebody says no, it's not to say it's not a big deal at times, right? But it's you're accepting of that because there's a healthy level of knowing yourself and not looking for approval on the outside, being very clear on your values, and working from the inside out. There's some God relationship, spirituality, you know power greater than yourself, whatever you call it. There's a connection there with your boundaries. It's about getting to know yourself and also setting up these boundaries. So how do you set them with men? And it's funny because I've been reading a lot about boundaries and doing some research about this lately. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, gosh, sometimes I can be a combination of all three. And that's okay. So remember, boundaries are about flexibility and looking at where you want to swing towards. So when you know your values and you know what's healthy for you and what works well, when it comes to men dating and relationships, one of the things you want to know right up front when it comes to dating, when you're setting boundaries, is you want to know where they're at and if they're in conjunction with you, if they're in conjunction with your values, right? I recommend chatting about this in the first couple dates. Like, what are you looking for? Being really open about that, zipping it, let them share. Why, what do you hope to get from, being on the dating side, or, what's important to you at this point in your life? It's, I know you just recently went through a divorce, right? So people have, understanding where people are and meeting them where they're at. If they're not in a place where they're aligned with your values, you don't want to keep them in the mix. This is really important. So this is all about having healthy boundaries. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. So one of the things that I coach my clients around is you're really setting yourself up for heartbreak 99% of the time if you date a man who's in the process of a divorce. And you might be asking, well, why is he on a dating site if he's not ready to date? Well, he might think that he's ready to date. Many men do. And there are a small percentage that can flow into relationship, but very, very few. It's an uphill battle. So 98% of the time, I would say, if you meet someone and he tells you he's in the process of a divorce, when you go out on that first date with him, you say, gosh, it was so nice to meet you, and I've had a lovely time, if that's true for you. And, I'm not comfortable. Or you could just say this, say it either way. I'm not comfortable dating someone who, isn't fully divorced. It's just against my value system. Or even just saying, gosh, I think you're great. And, for me, I'm just not comfortable with getting to know someone while they're going through a divorce. I know there's a lot that people tend to go through, and he may try to talk you out of it. That's the thing when you set a boundary, especially when you start setting healthy boundaries for yourself. It doesn't always feel good. Quick example, a client of mine, she's been dating, and she's really good at dating multiple people until, the right one comes in, and the right one's coming for her. So she went out on a date with someone where she had a good time with them, first couple dates, and he asked her to participate in paying for the date. Now, some women don't care. Some women are like, sure, I'll split the cost of the date, or, split the cost of the dinner, because a lot of times women don't want to feel like they owe a man. However, my client, because we've really gotten clear on her values, she wants to feel cherished and adored. So she feels like the man should, you know, pay as he's courting her in the beginning. And obviously, as time moves on, if they're, in a committed relationship, or, even as they're dating, she'll absolutely participate in paying for some things. So, all of it depends upon the nature of the relationship. Now, you might think that's rigid, but it's really not. And she, he brought it up to her a couple times, and she said, "Look, I think you're great. I'm really having a good time with you. And what I'm also hearing is that this is a real problem," because he had also shared that in his experience, when he's done that, so this is his trigger, that, women take advantage of him. Women take advantage of his generosity. And she said, "Well, gosh, I'm really sorry that you feel that way. And I don't think it's going to work with us if, that doesn't change, because I don't feel comfortable with that." So when it comes to setting boundaries, healthy boundaries, it's all about your values. Now, here's the thing about boundaries and flexibility. This is what's really important. Boundaries can change as time goes on. So let's just say you're dating someone, you're getting to know him. I've got to do something where you guys are going to plug in my computer, or else I'm going to lose you. I have this feeling. Sorry. Let's just say you're dating someone, and he's trying to get close to you with intimacy, and that's not, something that I coach my women around, especially if you're looking for something that's real, is not to get intimate with someone unless you're in an exclusive relationship heading the same direction. And a lot of times people will get intimate prematurely. So, really connecting with yourself around what feels right. Gosh, I just don't do that unless I'm in a committed relationship. So the guy might say, "Well, I'm not dating anybody else. How about if we get into a committed relationship?" I'm not ready for that yet. However, the boundaries can shift, right? So something that's a boundary in the beginning can shift into something else as you're getting to know them. So boundaries are about flexibility. It's not about people pleasing. It's not about hiding yourself or hiding your emotions. And it's really about, seeking to understand the other person, and, the ability to identify your wants, needs, and desires, ask for them, respect the other person's wants, needs, and desires. And also, there are times when boundaries come up and you're not going to like his, or he's not going to like yours. It doesn't mean the party's over with you guys. It means that you can agree to disagree. So it's, the biggest thing is not to stuff your values and not to go against them. I think oftentimes we know if we're going against our values because it just doesn't feel comfortable. It feels a little awkward. It feels a little unsafe. So that's where getting curious about where the person is, and not over sharing, not overdoing things. I think, a lot of times as when women want to develop a relationship, and men do this too, by the way, they'll start to overshare everything in the book, maybe before the timing's right. So it's one thing to be vulnerable and create intimacy, because that helps to open the door for him to be open and vulnerable. It's all about, it's kind of like a slow leak in a tire. It's just taking your time, but yet not hiding things. So if you're asked a question, answer it authentically and be you. However, if there's something that, this is a really big thing when it comes to boundaries too, is know what you can really talk about in a way that you don't have a ton of energy around, and know what you can't. Maybe and let me give you an example of that. Maybe you just went through a huge custody battle with an ex, and it was really hard on you, and you're processing those feelings. So it might be hard for you to talk about that without crying, without maybe even going into some blame. So setting that boundary with yourself, if they're like, oh, what happened? Gosh, I would love to share that with you. And right now it's still a little raw for me. So I'll definitely share it as soon as I've fully processed it, and share what you can, right? Here's our situation at the moment, and thank you for asking, right? You want to be open, authentic, and also unapologetic about how you're showing up, what's happening, and the whys. I think a lot of times there's this fear around what other people think, if they're going to judge you, or why you don't have, why you're not married, why this is, whatever it is, why you don't have children yet when you said you wanted them. Everybody's on their own journey, and other people don't care that much. If you're so concerned about what other people think, they forget really, really quickly that, your guy didn't come with you to the last couple of parties. They're not concerned about that at the end of the day, and they're typically not talking too much about it because people are more concerned about themselves. So what I would be curious about is, which boundary style do you identify with the most? Is it rigid? Is it porous? Is it healthy? Is there a combination of three? Typically, there's one that you can identify with more than the rest. I would invite you to go ahead and share what that is. So I hope this has been helpful for you today. Boundaries are so important. They're a little different than expectations. However, people, that saying, you teach people how to treat you, right? If you are allowing things that are against your values, it's natural for human nature to test one another. It's just natural. We test, we can push, and men will do it as much as women will do it. And they'll, oh, okay, this doesn't work. And men actually, especially a healthy man, he feeds off of the fact that you have a strong sense of yourself, you know who you are, and you're setting healthy boundaries that work for you. Even if they don't like it sometimes in the moment, they'll shift back around and open up to you. They're not going to stop seeing you because of that. And if they do, they're not your right type of person. Detaching from, the emotions that this is the last person on earth. Okay. Hope this helps. You guys, post in the comments below what kind of boundary style that you identify with the most. Also, please share this with a woman that you feel needs to hear this. Be a giver, support other women in helping themselves to really create the kind of relationship that they desire. And thank you for doing that, by the way. And also, if you're seeing us on YouTube, hit the like button if you happen to like this video. Also, subscribe to us too, and ring that little bell so that you can actually get notifications every time we publish a new video, which is often. So I will see you guys on Monday. Have a fabulous weekend. Bye.